2026, is this the year you can finally buy the buy to let? Or is this the year you can finally buy your first home? Or maybe you want to upgrade to a bigger property in 2026. Stay with me in this video and I'll cover 3 main points of what I think of the real estate space in the UK in 2026. First point, is this the time to buy a buy to let? Second point, your personal circumstances that you have to consider when you buy a property in 2026 and how that has changed since 2025. Third point, how to use mortgage wisely so that you can generate a lot of wealth over the duration of 20 to 30 years. Point number 1, buy to let. Is this finally the time? Well, unfortunately, sorry to disappoint you. Investors Chronicle, yep, buy to let is dead. And following week, it also has another article that says buy to let is dead. And I almost just want to say this as a warning because having been a property consultant for the past few years, I get a lot of people who are still obsessed about buy to let despite what the signs are showing them. The time to make money for buy to let has gone, or rather the time to make easy money from buy to let has gone. Despite what a lot of content creators are trying to sell you, they say, oh, you know, you have buy to let opportunities in the north part of England. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not familiar with north of England. I'm more familiar with London. And I would say buy to let in London is probably dead, long gone, and 6 feet under, and the dead body is probably halfway decomposed already. There are much easier ways to make money. And the reason why buy to let is dead is because the tax rule have changed since 2016. The rules and regulation will change further in May 2026 to make it more protective of tenants, which I think is the right thing to do, in my opinion. And in my opinion, a lot of the rules and regulation actually would make it easier for first-time home buyer to get on the property ladder, which I personally think, this is just my personal opinion, housing should be built for people to live in, not as a speculative tool. Maybe because I'm Singaporean and that's our philosophy, right? Let's push up the home ownership, but let's reduce the number of the small landlords that have buy-to-lets. And there are much better ways to make money, really. Even to make money from real estate, there are much easier and much better way to make money. Investing in REIT is one of them. So I mentioned about REIT in one of my previous videos. REIT stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. These are companies who go out there and buy real estate assets, such as warehouses, nursing homes, clinics that they rent out to NHS, offices, or even industrial space. And these REITs can be just really easy to buy and sell. They're very easy to manage. Like these are companies that manage real estate professionally. And you know, it saves you the hassle of having to deal with tenants, having to deal with leases, having to deal with estate agents, and having to deal with, I don't know, broken pipes and stuff. It's just way too much trouble being a buy-to-let landlord nowadays. And I know people have been telling you, you've probably seen a lot of advertisement telling you buy-to-let is the way to go, or you should go commercial REIT. I still think that time has passed, and those people are not that interested in making you money. They're more interested in lining their own pockets, selling you a course that is £5,000 to £8,000. I fundamentally disagree with that approach. For me, I have so many other resources on my YouTube video. It's all free. I have no courses to sell you. I mean, I used to sell a course that's £39.99 on how to get on the property ladder here in the UK, but the time has passed. I personally think it's actually really easy to get on the property ladder in the UK nowadays if you have a habit of savings, which you probably should watch my other videos on how you can improve your savings in 2026. So you can thank me later for saving you £5,000 to £8,000 of course fee, but do me a favor. Leave a comment below and say yay to 2026 before we move to the next section of this video. Okay, point number 2. If you are thinking of getting on the property ladder in 2026, is this a good time? Would the market fall further? Well, I personally think it's okay for you to buy your first home in 2026. If you're planning to stay there for at least 5 to 7 years. I have a video that compares, is it better for you to rent or better for you to buy? It is actually my most popular video with over 1,000 views by now, so thank you. And so you can probably click the link somewhere around here. If not, I'll put the link below. I think 5 to 7 years is like a sweet spot. Your individual circumstances might be different, and the duration actually varies with how expensive the property is, because the big part of what makes a difference is actually the stamp duty. When you have to pay a lump sum of stamp duty, you need time to amortize it over a longer duration of time to recoup the cost. So yeah, watch that video, buy versus rent, if you're thinking of buying a property in 2026 as your first home. One thing I do want to caveat, the economy in the UK has been quite unstable in the last couple of years. And just amongst my friend circles, I see that a lot more people are considering either moving to different parts of UK or moving out of the UK to find better job opportunities. So if that is that might potentially happen to you, say in 3 to 5 years' time, you might want to think about whether is it sensible for you to buy your first home right now, because you might want to move to the US, for example, and what's going to happen to that flat that you just bought. The thing about being an accidental landlord, accidental meaning you bought the property with the intention of you living in there, but personal circumstances change, let's say 3 to 5 years down the track, and you want to rent the property out. Being an accidental landlord in the UK is not a fun thing. Firstly, because you're taxed at a very high tax rate, but at the same time, you assume all the responsibilities of taking on a tenant because of the change to the Tenants' Rights Bill. And I think it's actually a good change at a societal level. It means it will be a lot harder for you to ask the tenant to leave unless you are planning to move back into the flat or property, or unless you're planning to sell the property. And it will also make it a lot more difficult for you to increase the rent for your tenant. Couple that with the tax rule change that was imposed in 2016, it just means there's really not a little advantage being, first of all, even a landlord in the first place, and secondly, an accidental landlord where your tax rate can be pretty high. So take that into consideration. And the second point, why there are other factors that you might need to consider before you buy your first home, is the economy is quite unstable. It also means that, I personally see a lot of my friends being made redundant. So, well, nobody is irreplaceable, right? So we are all at a higher chances of being made redundant just because the economy is not that great. So when you buy a property, you're taking on quite a lot of liabilities in the form of a mortgage. Basically, you promise the bank that you will pay the bank over 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and sometimes even 40 years, which I absolutely do not encourage. So you need to consider your ability to service the mortgage over a long duration of time. And do you have emergency funds set aside just in case you're being made redundant? Doesn't matter if you have been working for your company for the past 10 years, nobody is safe nowadays. And if you were, touch wood, okay, touch wood, I'm happy. If you were being made redundant, do you have enough emergency savings to last you 3 to 6 months? Especially if you're a little bit older, let's say you're in your 40s, do you have that savings? Because it will take you a little bit longer to land your next job if you're above 40. Let's just face it, ageism exists in the workplace. And so when you take on a mortgage, just be mindful that please at least set aside 6 months of emergency funds so that you can service your mortgage in case the unfortunate thing happened to you. So that's really point number 2 when it comes to what do you have to consider when you buy your first home, or move to your next property, or upgrade to the next property in 2026. Point number 3 is about mortgage. I surprisingly have met quite a lot of friends who can buy properties outright with cash. These are the people who have been very, very prudent. They have been saving all their life, and maybe they're quite averse to borrowing money from the bank, either because of ethical or religious reason, or even just maybe just don't like the concept. I always say mortgage and any form of debt, use it like the Goldilocks, not too much and not too little. So on the not too much end, please do not take on a mortgage where you are not required to pay any deposit. I personally think that's a very, very dangerous thing to do. I have seen zero deposit mortgage in the UK, and I'm like, oh, I cringe, especially when the property price is not increasing as much as before. The thing about 0% deposit, I get it. Some people just want to get on the property ladder, and they maybe haven't been able to save, and they thought, well, if I can just get a 0% mortgage, then I can get on the property ladder. The unfortunate truth, and I'm going to be blunt here, so sorry in advance, if you have trouble saving even 5% of the deposit for your home, you might really want to think about how you manage finances in the first place. And when you buy a property, you're taking on a huge liability in the form of a mortgage. You might think that this home is yours, but technically speaking, legally speaking, it's actually not yours. The bank owns it because the bank lent you the money to buy the flat or the property. And so if you fail to pay the bank could take the property back. And so really bear that in mind. And I would, if you don't have the deposit saved up, I would strongly encourage you to save at least 5 and ideally minimum 10% of the property price of the property that you're thinking of buying. Save that as a deposit before you even start shopping around. And in the previous section, I also mentioned about having emergency funds. So at the point when you're buying your first property, not only that you have the money to pay for the stamp duty plus a 10% deposit, you also have 6 months worth of emergency funds saved up, or 3 to 6 months, depending on your age. If you're above 40, I would recommend minimum 6 months. So that's how you build financial resilience, just in case you're being made redundant or any emergency happen, and you might dip into your emergency funds. And the emergency doesn't even have to be something drastic like, somebody got cancer, which is, unfortunate. And thank goodness for NHS, at least they provide that kind of help. What if your dog has cancer, right? I mean, and you have no pet insurance to cover it? What if the boiler in your new home breaks down, and that's £2,000 of repair? That's what I mean by emergencies. What if you have to attend a funeral somewhere and you need to buy train tickets or air tickets and that sort of stuff? Of course, we never wish unfortunate things to happen to anyone, but it is part of life, right? We do have to budget money for that. So Goldilocks, sorry, I digress. Goldilocks, when it comes to mortgage, not too much. So please do not borrow a 0% deposit mortgage, and not too little. I have seen friends who could buy a property right out with cash. But these people sometimes have also been very good investors in the past. And I thought, why don't you just continue to invest while borrowing money from the bank? Because that way you can actually generate more return. I'm going to illustrate an example how that could happen. Let's just say you can afford to buy an apartment that is £250,000 cash outright. You do not need a mortgage if you choose to. And let's just assume you have been investing in the QQQ in the last 5 years. This is what we call the Mag 7, the Microsoft, the Nvidias, the Tesla, and Facebook, Google, so on and so forth. Let's just say you've been investing in QQQ ETF, which is actually quite a simple thing to do with any of your ISAs or SIP account. The last 5 years, QQQ would have given you 15% return every single year. So let's just take the example of you buying, let's say, a studio flat somewhere in London, £250,000. Instead of paying £250,000 by cash, if you have so much cash lying around, you pay £50,000 deposit and you borrow £250,000 from the bank. Let's just assume the bank charges you 5% interest for the £200,000 that you're borrowing from them. And with that £200,000, you continue to invest in QQQ going forward while you pay mortgage every single month. I can calculate the mortgage payment for you, but based on an interest plus principal repayment, you will end up paying £10,700 of interest payment in your first year of borrowing money from the bank. But if you continue to invest this £200,000 into QQQ, and assuming that QQQ will still generate 15% return for you in 2026 onward, you will end up making £30,000 from having this £200,000 investing in QQQ. This is £30,000. This is what you make from QQQ. £30,000 versus £10,700. You will end up having an extra of £19,300 from this differential. Even if you have to pay tax on this £19,000, hopefully you're smart enough to invest this within the ISA or SIP wrapper. Even if you have to pay 40% tax on this £30,000 that you make by investing in QQQ, you will still end up being £7,300 richer than if you have paid for the apartment with cash outright at a ticket price of £250,000. And this is before compounding. Imagine if the £200,000 is parked in either a SIP or an ISA where you don't need to pay tax on any of the capital gain or dividend. The £19,300 excess generated in your first year will give you £32,895 in the second year and £37,829 and 25p in the third year, and so on. So it really just snowballs. Let's just assume QQQ only gives you 10% return as opposed to 15% return, which is what we have seen on a longer term time horizon. The £200,000 that you borrow from the bank to buy a flat will generate you over £2 million of excess return, while you pay around £148,000 in interest costs because you're borrowing money from the bank, so you have to pay interest. Overall, you're still more than £2 million better off over a 25-year period where you're borrowing money from the bank to buy your studio flat in London. What I've just described is called a carry trade. Very often, carry trade is used to describe forex exchange where there's different interest costs in different countries. The most famous carry trade, the most popular one, is Japanese yen versus Mexican peso, where interest rate in Japanese yen is really, really low. But assuming that the exchange rate between Japanese yen and Mexican peso stays more or less the same, Mexican peso pays a much, much higher interest. So if, let's say, Japanese yen, I can borrow money from the bank at 0.5% and I lend it to Mexico for 5%, I'm capitalizing on this 4.5% difference. So in this case, go back to the example of you using a mortgage to buy your flat, even though you could well pay it by cash, you're capturing the differential between, let's say, 5% mortgage interest rate versus 15% or 10% that you can get from QQQ. So every year you're growing it by 5% faster. So let that sink in. Just making that decision, just borrowing money from the bank in a sensible way could make you £2 million richer over a 25-year period. And we're not even talking about that big of an amount. I mean, some people have help from their parents, so they have a lot more than £250,000 of cash lying around to buy a flat or property. So this is where, if you have that cash lying around, you can really use it sensibly and invest it very, very wisely. Not an investment advice, because there are risks involved in investing in either an ETF or a single stocks or even a portfolio of stocks. So it is a skill set that you might have to start learning. But generally, just investing in a very broad-based ETF, be it like a British ETF or European ETF or American ETF, over a very long duration of time can serve you well over 10, 20, 25 years. While you let that sink in, do me a favor. Type in yay to 2026 on the comment section so that we can all get our energy level up and welcome 2026 and make this a successful year for ourselves. And don't forget to click a like and a subscribe. And most importantly, send this video to your friend so that we can all get rich together. See you next time.